God. Ladies and gentlemen, today's program is about to begin. We ask that you please put your phones and mobile devices on silent. Mayoral Housing, Transportation, and Jobs Summit, November elections to shape LA's future. To begin our program, please welcome Professor Stuart Gabriel, Arden Realty Chair and Director of the UCLA Ziman Center for Real Estate.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I have to congratulate all of you. You are the hardy souls that came out while it was still dark and braved the highways. And indeed, we have a little bit of rain here today in LA, which is a wonderful thing, a great omen. And I welcome you on behalf of UCLA, on behalf of the Anderson School of Management. We're here in the Anderson School this morning, and on behalf of the UCLA Ziman Center for Real Estate, to today's program. Of course, we are so pleased to again host our LABC's Mayoral Housing, Transportation, and Jobs Summit. We look forward to hearing from the mayor. We look forward to the tremendous lineup of speakers. Just a word or two before we begin. Firstly, I think all of us in the room appreciate that provision of adequate affordable housing together with transportation infrastructure is key to economic viability. When you look to economic theory, low-skill workforce and high-skill jobs are not substitutes in production of goods and services. They're complements. And what that means is that all are necessary for growth and prosperity in our region and elsewhere. We also know from economic analysis that households and firms are mobile. They do move, they can move, and they move where there isn't affordable housing to areas where there is affordable housing and where there is adequate transportation infrastructure. They move to areas of better opportunity. And LA has seen this movie many times in the past, even dating as far back as the 1970s, where we saw the hollowing out of the manufacturing base of the LA basin. So what today's summit does is it very wisely links provision of affordable housing to transportation infrastructure development. I think if there's one basic of affordable housing development, it's that you can't put low-cost housing on expensive land, or at least it's very hard to do so. And that rule of economics basically constrains large-scale provision of affordable housing in much of central LA. It means that the reality of the situation is that over the course of the years, much of the affordable housing will be built in peripheral areas of the north and the east of LA, and it means that we will be in very significant need of efficient, appropriate transportation infrastructure, and transportation infrastructure that will get people from areas of affordable housing to more centralized jobs. And so we're going to look forward today to hearing about innovations in transportation infrastructure, be they fixed rail, be they light rail, be they ride sharing in the form of Uber or Lyft. Now, as you all know, the election season is upon us. I even cast my vote yesterday. We have many opportunities here on the ballot in LA that pertain to today's topics. We have Measure JJJ that requires developers to add affordable units. We have Measure HHH, which asks voters to approve a $1.2 billion general obligation bond to finance supportive affordable housing for our vast homeless population. We have Measure M, a hike in the sales tax here in LA County of half a cent to pay for some major transit projects, our much needed extension of light rail to LAX. And by the way, I'm not telling you how to vote here. The bringing of a subway to Westwood. A Measure A, another 1.5 cent per square foot parcel tax to pay for new and existing parks across the county. and a neighborhood integrity initiative. This is slated for March of 2017, an initiative whereby, according to all analyses, would significantly restrict size and number of residential development projects via moratoria on construction that increases development density. We here at UCLA, we applaud the LABC for their leadership on these and related issues, so critical to the economic viability and the quality of life of our region. As really one of the world's leading universities, and even yesterday we heard from U.S. News & World Report, UCLA was ranked the 10th best university in the world. We're very pleased about that. We feel a special obligation to serve the community that we're part of. And at the UCLA Ziman Center for Real Estate, we do this through a myriad of research, educational programs, policy analysis, and the like that address many of the issues being addressed today. If you've ever seen the seal of the University of California, it has a couple of words from the first couple verses of Genesis, and those words are, "Let there be light," so that here at UCLA we have an affirmative obligation to shine that light and to constructively engage to better our world. Let me now introduce your summit MC. Her name is Hannah Miette. Hannah is managing editor of what's called The Real Deal Los Angeles. This is a derivative of The Real Deal, started in New York in 2003, an entity that publishes up-to-the-minute real estate industry news. The Real Deal in New York has a 60,000-person circulation monthly magazine. It has websites in New York and South Florida. And Hannah launched The Real Deal LA earlier this year, prior to that reporting for the BJ rather. So please join me in welcoming Hannah Miette. Thank you.
Good morning. So happy that you guys showed up on the early side. So as Stuart mentioned, thank you, Stuart. I'm Hannah Miette. I'm the managing editor of The Real Deal LA. And we are a frequently updated real estate news website, updated about 10 times a day. And then we also run a quarterly print publication that is solely about all things that connect to real estate in Los Angeles, which is a lot of things that will be discussed today. And we have an investigative lean, so basically we get the dirt, which is important to keep everyone informed. And to steal a phrase from our presidential nominee, the Puffy Cheeto, I'm also here today as a nasty woman. Is there any, I know it's early and people are still coming in, but are there any other nasty women in the audience already? Okay, great, wonderful. Well, hold on to your seatbelts because this is not going to be a boring day. Much like the presidential debates, it wouldn't be much fun if we all agreed. And there are a lot of people on the docket today that don't agree. And I will give you the cliff notes on those folks shortly. But first, just get this. Let's give a big thank you to the UCLA Anderson School of Management for hosting the Mayoral Housing, Transportation, and Jobs Summit again this year. The LABC and UCLA convened this summit, now in its 15th year, to encourage dialogue between business and government leaders on issues impacting housing, mobility, and economic growth in Los Angeles. In this critical election year, voters in California have been inundated with news about the presidential race, unless they have managed to live under a rock, which has sometimes seemed like a pleasant place to live during this campaign. Another plus to living under a rock is that it's affordable, unlike most real estate in Los Angeles. But we don't just have to decide which nasty woman we would like to elect as president. With 17 state ballot initiatives and many county, municipal, and special district measures on ballots up and down the state, many voters are still deciding on the local issues, which speakers will discuss today. So if you're using your ballot guide as a hand wave or a doorstop instead of reading it, don't worry, we got you. So covering ballot initiative season as a journalist in California has been a trip. It's easy to forget that this isn't how it works in other states. The Real Deal, we began in New York, and I'm constantly in contact with our reporters there, and they've been confounded the more that they learn about our ballot process. We have been covering at The Real Deal, and we will continue to cover the amount of money that is spent both proposing and opposing these measures. So, we're really in a unique position here in California, where voters are faced with decisions directly that have great impact. But they aren't always what they seem. And if voters are not reading between the lines, they can get duped. And that is why the role of journalism is so important in these elections. Many initiatives that relate to real estate should really be called TTT and VVV, because at their core, their concerns are traffic, 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 and views, views, views. As in, don't block my view, bro. And although Michael Weinstein's Neighborhood Integrity Initiative is not until the March ballot, those issues may come into play in today's discussions. Speaking of which, The Real Deal is running a week-long, in-depth series on the Neighborhood Integrity Initiative after the election. So it'll be in-depth, one in-depth story every day for the week that follows the election. So definitely keep your eyes out for that online. We're at therealdeal.com/LA. And we'll be getting into some of the issues on the potential impact that the initiative could have if it passes, and a lot of things that have not yet been discussed. So tune in. But the theme of today's summit is the more immediate vote in 2 weeks. A lot is at stake with Transit Measure M, Homelessness Housing Measure HHH, and Housing and Labor Measure JJJ. Brought to you by Sesame Street. The theme this year is fittingly November elections to shape LA's future. Housing, transportation, and jobs are the most fundamental drivers of growth, quality of life, and economic opportunity in any city. These topics may seem pretty basic, but when we consider that 44% of all households in the LA region spend more than 30% of their incomes on housing alone, Angelenos experience 2 40-hour work weeks worth of freeway traffic each year, and that at least 46,000 people in LA County did not have a roof over their heads last night, we are reminded of just how critical these fundamental issues are to our city. The solutions to these challenges are not easy, and they require that groups that don't always get along not only talk to each other, but cooperate. So on that note, we have a very exciting program in store for you today. We open with our business keynote by Bobby Turner, CEO of Turner Impact Capital, to speak about the role of social impact investing in providing workforce housing. I interviewed Bobby when he first launched the fund, which now has investors like Eva Longoria and Bill Ackman. But while he's acquired workforce housing projects in places like Florida and Nevada, it doesn't look like he has been able to invest in Los Angeles, and I'm willing to bet that he has some very interesting thoughts on why that is, and how politicians might be able to lure him back home. On a side note, Turner Impact Capital's home is Santa Monica, which has seen building prices soar, which we've been covering. And some say they will soar much higher if the Louvre passes. The Louvre, which I love saying because it sounds like a mispronunciation of the Parisian Museum, is a measure that would require a popular vote for all buildings above 2 stories. 2 stories. You've got to love Santa Monica. So after Bobby speaks, our first panel this morning will be introduced by Los Angeles City Council President Herb Wesson and moderated by LABC Institute Chairman Brad Cox. The panel will discuss successful models for market rate workforce and affordable housing development and how to replicate those models in Los Angeles. Later in the morning, Metro CEO Phil Washington will give a presentation on the vision for LA County Traffic Improvement Plan, commonly known as Measure M. He will kick off a panel about the future of transportation in Los Angeles. Panelists will discuss how the expansion of LA's public transportation system, as well as Uber, Lyft, autonomous vehicles, and who knows, maybe the Hyperloop, might shape mobility in LA's future. During our lunch session on the patio under the tent, Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti will give the summit keynote, and I bet he has some news to share with us. Bill Whitty, Chairman and CEO of Related California, will moderate a panel on the future of workforce housing with Oakland Mayor Libby Schaaf, State Assembly Member Richard Bloom, LA City Council Member Mike Bonin, and more. Today's program will be live streaming on LABC's website, labusinesscouncil.org. We will also be filming portions of the program to air on LA City View Channel 35. We hope that you will use our social media hashtag. That's hashtag LABC Summit. That's LABC and the word summit to share your thoughts and ideas from today's discussions. I would now like to welcome our next speaker, Nadine Watt. Nadine is president of Watt Companies, where she oversees all commercial investment activities for the company's 6 million square foot portfolio of multifamily, industrial, office, and retail properties. She is the first female chair of the Los Angeles Business Council. Please welcome Nadine Watt.
Business leaders, community leaders, distinguished guests, nasty women, and bad hombres. On behalf of the Los Angeles Business Council and the Los Angeles Business Council Institute, thank you for joining us at the 15th Annual Mayoral Housing, Transportation, and Jobs Summit. We are certainly off to a great start, and it's wonderful to see all of you here today. Let's give another thank you to our MC, Hannah Miette. Before we proceed, I would like to acknowledge some of the people and organizations who have worked hard to put this event together. I would like to thank our summit co-chairs, Bank of America, California Community Foundation, Hayworth, Unisource Solutions, Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco, JP Morgan Chase, LADWP, the Rosalind and Arthur Gilbert Foundation, and all of our gold and silver sponsors. Without your support, today's event would not be possible. I would also like to acknowledge our over 70 cooperating organizations for being with us today and for your help promoting the summit. You will see a list on the program guide. I'm not going to list all of them now. And thank you again to the UCLA Anderson School of Management for hosting the summit for the 14th year. We have many distinguished speakers on our program, and we are so thrilled to have all of you here with us today. I would also like to acknowledge the honorees from our summit reception 2 nights ago, where the LABC awarded several individuals and organizations for their outstanding work to address housing, transportation, and economic development issues in Los Angeles. We awarded California Speaker Anthony Rendon for his leadership in the legislature to assure financing for affordable housing. Mayor Eric Garcetti received the Aimco Housing Impact Award for his efforts to end homelessness in Los Angeles by budgeting a record investment of nearly $140 million for the city's Affordable Housing Trust Fund. We presented the first ever LABC Philanthropic Award to the California Community Foundation, Weingart Foundation, and Conrad N. Hilton Foundation for providing $16 million in loans and grants to help the city produce at least 1,000 units of permanent supportive housing per year. We had another inaugural award, the LABC Institute Economic Impact Team Award, given to the Hollywood Park Master Plan Team, including Wilson Meany, the LA Rams, Gibson Dunn, Inglewood Airport Area Chamber of Commerce, Sugarman Communications Group, and Inglewood Mayor James Butts for their leadership in developing the master plan and revitalizing the former Hollywood Park site in Inglewood, not to mention bringing the Rams home to Los Angeles. Go Rams! It was a wonderful event on Wednesday night, and I'm excited to acknowledge all of our honorees. The November election is right around the corner, and LA voters will be making important, long-lasting decisions on the very issues we are discussing today at our summit. So we convene leaders in housing and transportation with perspectives from nearly every side of these important issues. Our distinguished speakers and panelists will weigh in on the ballot measures and initiatives that we'll vote on in 11 days. I can't wait. I am proud to say that the LABC is in strong support of LA Countermeasure M to expand public transportation in LA and build the world-class regional transportation system that LA County deserves. We also support LA City Measure HHH to fund affordable and supportive housing solutions to reduce homelessness. And we oppose Measure JJJ, or Build Better LA, as JJJ would dramatically increase the cost to build new housing in Los Angeles and places overly burdensome requirements on all types of housing, including workforce and affordable housing, that is so desperately needed. Speakers today will also discuss some of the biggest challenges LA faces today, and importantly, innovative solutions for a sustainable future. Government can be a great partner, but the private sector often comes up with key solutions that are market-driven and can be scaled. Our business keynote today, for today's summit, is here to talk about an example of just that type of innovative thinking. I am thrilled to introduce someone leading the effort to provide scalable, market-driven solutions to the workforce housing shortage we are facing, not just in LA, but in urban cities across the nation. Over the past 25 years, Bobby Turner has established himself as one of the country's most prominent private equity real estate investors, as well as a pioneer in the area of social impact investing. Today, Bobby serves as Principal and Chief Executive Officer of Turner Impact Capital, one of the nation's largest social impact investment firms with more than $2.5 billion in investment potential to address some of the country's most pervasive societal issues in areas like education, healthcare, and of course, workforce housing. Recently, Bobby announced a partnership with Eva Longoria on his housing fund, which is focused on the preservation and enrichment of workforce housing across the country. His work is solving a fundamental problem facing so many, and he's doing it by harnessing market forces. He calls it profits with a purpose. Please help me welcome Bobby Turner to the stage.
Good morning. I'm a bit under the weather this morning, and I tell you that in advance because I don't want you to misconfuse my sniffles as support of Donald Trump, because surely they are not. I thought I'd start this morning with a little audience participation. By show of hands, who knows where the Dow Jones Industrial Average is within 15,000 points? Seriously, everyone raise their hand, please. Where are the 30-year multifamily mortgage rates? Anyone know? Great. What's the current price of a barrel for oil? Anyone know? How many kids dropped out of high school last year? Nobody knows. Which one of these four is a better leading indicator of how we're doing as a community? Yeah? So for those of you who don't know me, I like to think of myself as an evolved capitalist and a recovering philanthropist. And I say that because for the vast of my career, I was both a capitalist and a philanthropist, and I struggled at both. As a capitalist, I was one of 3 partners in Canyon Partners, one of the world's largest hedge funds, and I was able to accumulate great wealth, but I always struggled with the moral discomfort of candidly creating wealth that came from making money off of other people's misfortunes. Maybe I tried to buy my redemption through philanthropy, but there I had an emotional discomfort by throwing money at other people's misfortunes. My wife and I funded millions of dollars into programs that we thought were for the benefit of issues that were near and dear to us. What we found over years is that we were really just putting Band-Aids on issues, that in many instances we were funding legacies of dependency and that we were being reactive. And what I concluded about 20 years ago is that if one wanted to treat a problem in society, then the government and philanthropy are just fine. But the reality is we have proof now, over hundreds of years, that neither the government nor philanthropy creates sustainable, scalable solutions that stick. If you want to really cure, you have to harness market forces to create scalable, sustainable solutions, and that means making money. So with that knowledge, about 20 years ago, I did something that my wife thought was impossible of this man, and probably most men in particular, and that was I evolved, okay? Because we men don't evolve. And I evolved in what we call a social impact investor. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the term social impact investor, I'll tell you what it's not. It's not philanthropy. It's not government, and it is definitely not a business model that sacrifices yields at the expense of tackling a societal issue. Simply put, it's an investment thesis that recognizes that doing good and doing well don't have to be exclusive. It's a marketplace where you focus on the critical mismatches between supply and demand of things like community-serving housing, schools, education, healthcare facilities, and where the traditional investor has been the government and philanthropy. And candidly, I think the term of art is they both suck. So think about it. For years, we've segregated profits and purpose, and our reliance on the government, candidly, has handicapped our outcomes. Fact is, we have some pretty daunting challenges. But this morning, I'd like to impress upon you that daunting challenges actually lead to generational investment opportunities. Opportunities where an investor can make great change, both societal and financial. So as many of you may know, my first social impact endeavor was with Magic Johnson back in 1998. We went on to raise about $2 billion of private equity capital called the Canyon Johnson Urban Funds. We went on to facilitate about $6 billion of urban revitalization. More recently with Andre Agassi, we've raised over $500 million to build over 69 schools to date, 35,000 school seats. We just raised another $350 million. We'll build another 100 school seats across the country in some of the most economically underserved communities. And within 7 years, by school seat count, we will become the 20th largest school district in the country. You can't do that as a philanthropist. You can't do that as a government. Now, while both initiatives have generated great risk-adjusted returns for our investors, they've also generated thousands of jobs, provided much-needed services and amenities, generated millions of dollars of incremental tax revenues, and changed the trajectories for tens of thousands of children's lives. So as we spend today talking about our city, with our underperforming schools, our critical shortage of workforce housing, our lack of preventative health care systems and options for millions and millions of residents, I'd like to suggest a framework where we can wean ourselves from the government and from philanthropy and harness market forces to create sustainable, scalable, and yes, for-profit solutions to tackle some of our problems we face as a city. So to do this, what I'll have to do is introduce you to the 6 underlying elements of social impact investing, what I refer to as the 6 Ps, which of course are not to be confused with the 6 Ps that most men over 50 have to take every night. I say that firsthand with confidence. But rather the 6 Ps of social impact investing, which include problems, people, which oftentimes are the same as the problems, property, plans, public policy, and priorities. So let's start with the problems. We can't kid ourselves. As a country and as a city, we have some daunting challenges. Take education for a starter. We spend #1 in the world per pupil for education, but somehow we manage to test anywhere between 25th and 30th internationally on standardized testing. In many urban communities across America, only 1/3 of our kids are graduating high school proficient in math and science. And most disheartening is we drop 1.4 million kids out of high school every year. That's a horrible thing, because these kids are 8 times more likely to go to jail, where we spend 3 times as much to incarcerate than we do to educate. Healthcare, again, we spend #1 in the world with regard to what we spend on patients, and our outcomes are in the bottom quartile of industrialized nations. Workforce housing, we'll talk about this more today, it's a critical and unsustainable issue that we face here, and many people believe that the biggest problem in society today is the disparity of wealth, right? When 1% of America controls 99% of the wealth, that undermines the fabric of a healthy society. Who agrees with that? It's problematic. Well, I disagree with all of you. I don't believe that we suffer from a disparity of wealth. This country actually was built on the disparity of wealth. To have a healthy capitalistic society, you have to have a lower class, a middle class, and an upper class. What we have today, well, we have an extremity of disparity of wealth, but what we have today is we have a disparity of hope. Because the 99% historically has always played nicely and fairly in the sandbox because they believed in the feasibility of the American dream. With hard work, with a great education, with affordable housing, and with a little bit of luck, you could actually believe in the mobility of the American dream and become the 1%. But today, you have a huge swath of Americans who believe that they have been foreclosed out of the American dream. Imagine growing up in East Baltimore, or East LA as a single parent. You have 2 children. You don't work 1 job, you probably work 2, maybe 3 jobs. You come home to a pretty crappy apartment in a pretty crappy neighborhood where you're spending 60% of your income on rent. To add insult to injury, your child is relegated to a public school district where the likelihood of them graduating high school is below 40%. Graduating college, below 2%. If it's in Baltimore and your color is black, the likelihood of them going to prison is 60%. Where is their hope? So when you remove hope from the equation, the only word that fills that is despair. And intensive disparity leads to intensive violence. That's what we're suffering from. It also leads to political circuses like we're seeing today in this country. But what I'd like to impress upon you today is that investing in hope, in education, in healthcare, and in housing is not only good business, it's the only way to right the listing ship of communities that are suffering from the injustices that result from social determination. How is it possible in America that the average life expectancy can be a 20-year difference because you live in a different zip code in the same city? So this is where the second P comes in. People. Because we need people like all of us here today to consider the possibilities that one can make money, real money, at the same time invest in social issues and the corresponding infrastructure. Now, contrary to everyone's assumptions that you're going to sacrifice yields, I'm here to dispel those thoughts. You see, for 20 years, I've actually, in my endeavors, I've proven that investing in densely populated, ethnically diverse communities that suffer from a shortage of quality community services can generate strong financial returns. In fact, I'll actually prove to you that you can drive better risk-adjusted returns when compared to alternative investment strategies. But it's not an easy sale. When Andre Agassi and I went out 3 years ago to raise our first charter school fund, we came across 4 kinds of investors. We came across the unionists, the capitalists, the communists, and the realists. Now, the unionists, when I was at Canyon, I managed billions of dollars for many state teachers' pension funds. Imagine the conversation I'd have with the Texas Teachers Fund. I have a great investment opportunity for you. It's all about the health and the future of society. And typically the investor would say, Bobby, we love your investment prowess. We'll take half the fund. What's the asset class? I would say, well, let me tell you more about it. This is a marketplace where it's backed by the government revenues. There's no competition. It's a last great monopoly. They'd say, we love the idea. What's the asset class? I'd say charter school fund. And they'd say, fuck you. And I'd say, seriously, that's a little harsh. And the response would be, no, I said, fuck you. I said, I heard you. What's the problem? Well, charter schools are the nemesis of the public school districts. And therefore, for every charter school job created that comes at the expense of a public school teacher's job, and you're undermining the union. And I would say, oh, quite the contraire. I'm incredibly pro-union. I just represent the children's union. And if education is going to be about adults and you're afraid of competition, then we are in trouble as a society. So the unions I didn't have a lot of success with. The capitalists. The vast majority of capitalists could not get past the fact that you could do good and do well. They did not believe that playing nicely in the sandbox worked for profits and purpose. The communists, fascinating. We met with the world's largest sovereign wealth fund, CIC, China Investment Corporation. And after our presentation with me and Andre, the gentleman from CIC leaned in and said, Mr. Agassi, Mr. Turner, I love your fund. We'll take the entire fund. To which Andre leaned into the table. Now, I've known Andre for about a year at that point in time, and what was most telling about Andre, by the way, his most 2 difficult years of high school were 8th grade. He's a dropout. And probably 6 weeks into my relationship with Andre, he called me on a Sunday morning and said, Bobby, I need help with math. I said, fantastic. I need help with my forehand. He goes, I don't need that much help with math. And I said, what's the problem? He goes, my son Jaden, who was 10 at the time, has a multiplication test on Monday. And he cannot explain to Jaden in what universe a -3 times a -3 could be a +9. He goes, 3 bad things compounded by 3 more bad things, that's a shitty day. I said, let me ask my wife. Rolled over in bed, I said, Lauren, Wharton graduate. I said, how do I explain this to Andre? She goes, tell Andre, it's like this. If you do a bad thing to a bad person, that's a good thing. Fair enough. Andre, he goes, I heard what your wife said. What's that got to do with -3 times -3? And I said, I don't know. But happy wife, happy life. That's what she said. He goes, Bobby. I said, Andre. I said, this is just a rule you're going to have to memorize. It's one of those tenets in math. He goes, maybe you can live your life that way, but I can't. That gives you great insight into Andre Agassi's wisdom and his confidence. So there we are a year later. The government of China has just said they would take the entire fund to invest with us. And Andre leans in and he says, I'm flattered, I'm humbled, but explain to me why the government of China wants to invest in a private equity real estate fund focused on education in America. To which the gentleman responded, Mr. Agassi, Mr. Turner, It may come as a surprise to you today, but your country is indebted to my country to the tune of nearly $2 trillion. And none of us here will be alive to see that debt repaid. Therefore, we, the government of China, have got to rely upon the next generation of Americans to grow your economy out of the debt you owe us, and you are failing miserably to educate them. Now, if that wasn't a piece of cold, humble pie, but why is it that the government of China is thinking long-term, and we as individuals know where the Dow Jones is, and we know where the barrel of oil is, and we know how much the Dodgers are making, but no one knows how many kids are dropping out of high school? We are conspicuous investors, and that's problematic. So needless to say, we didn't take their money because we felt that if we had to rely upon the people that had lent us the money to fix our problems, then we were really doomed as a society. So the unionists, the capitalists, the communists had failed. But the realists were those who recognized that social impact is value investing. So unlike most speculators, who's in the real estate business? Raise your hand, right? You're all speculators, right? You're betting to some extent on cap rate compressions or supply-demand imbalances. You're hoping that interest rates rise or fall. To some extent, you're speculating. Social impact investing is not speculating on demand. It's focusing on existing marketplaces where there is tremendous demand, and the mismatch is huge. Things like education, affordable housing, healthcare, and where the traditional investor has been the government, and they suck as competitors. Realists also recognize that investments in social impact are also great diversifications for their portfolios. They're alpha. There's zero correlation between the performance of our funds and the Dow Jones Industrial Average. What happens to the wait list? There's 1.2 million children for a wait list for a charter school today. $20,000 per school seat, that's a $22 billion infrastructure opportunity. Only people building charter schools? The government, public school districts. What happens to that wait list when inflation rises? When the Dow Jones collapses, when unemployment skyrockets? Absolutely nothing. So it's great diversification for a portfolio. So let's go to the third P, property. It's at the center of all the problems. It's where we teach our kids, we treat our sick, it's where we house our families. And let's talk about one particular problem, what I like to call the place where kids sleep at night and jobs sleep at night. An issue that I spend a lot of time on. And I'm not talking about low-income housing for those who earn less than 60% of the average median income, subsidized housing, Section 8 housing, but I'm focused on those that earn between 60 and 120% of the average median income, the essential service providers, teachers, policemen, firemen, social workers, healthcare workers, the backbone of society, those who make too much money to qualify for subsidized housing, but don't make enough money for affordable luxury housing or home ownership. Let's not kid ourselves. Everybody suffers. Communities, environment, worker productivity, and household well-being all suffer when housing is not proximate to the employment, education, and healthcare resources. On a national level, there's 43 million renter households, and growing by an additional 5 million renter households over the next 7 years. Today, 1 out of 2 renter households is rent-burdened, paying more than 30% of their income on rent. 1 out of 4 is severely rent-burdened, paying over 50% of their income on rent. It's worse here in LA. Roughly 60% of all renters here are rent-burdened, paying over a third of their income, and 1 out of 3 is severely rent-burdened, spending over 50%. This comes at the expense of food security, health security, retirement security. It comes at the expense of hope, and this is unsustainable. So this brings us to the fourth P. We need a plan. So if we know there's a huge demand, let's just build some more workforce units, right? Isn't that the simple, logical answer? Well, here's the first challenge. Notwithstanding the recent increases to minimum wage in LA, a for-profit developer cannot build new construction and make a market return if we're only going to charge 30% of income. Let's do the math. Family of 4 living in East LA, minimum wage, $10.50. Both parents work a 40-hour week. They're taking home $40,000 a year. Affordable rent, 1/3 of that is $12,000 a year in rent. If I'm a landlord, my profit margin is probably 50%, so I'm earning $6,000. I want to earn a 7% cap rate. That's $85,000 a unit. Let's assume 1,200 square feet per unit, $70 a square foot. What can you build in Los Angeles for $70 a square foot? You can't build dirt. You just can't do it, so that's problematic. Now, in an effort to address this shortage, Mayor Garcetti introduced a plan that would allow for the permitting up to 100,000 new housing units by 2120 with a target And it's just a target of 15% of these units, 15,000, be deemed affordable to those earning less than 80%. Now, as commendable as 15,000 units might sound, it doesn't do very much for the 1.25 million renters in LA who are rent burdened. 15,000 units doesn't do shit. I'm sorry. So we have to think out of the box. We have to come up with a bigger plan to incentivize direct investment and preservation of affordable workforce housing. But in the interim, we have a second, more critical challenge because our existing supply is shrinking. And this is really criminal. Every time B and C properties or subsidized properties in Los Angeles come off their compliance period or come to the market, they're being demolished for new construction, or they're being bought by opportunistic investors who improve the properties and increase the rents on the very consumer who has seen no wage inflation for 25 years. It's hard to see a scenario where that's a good thing long-term for the city of Los Angeles. While I haven't figured out a way to build new yet, I have figured out a way to generate market rate returns by buying the existing stock of housing, buying it, preserving affordability, and driving market rate returns. It's a pretty simple model that enables me to pay the same price as an opportunistic investor. But rather than buy and improve, as the opportunistic investor will do, I like to say what I do is I buy and enrich. Let's start with the facts. Two ways to drive profits. You can increase rents, or you can do what? Decrease expenses, right? So the opportunistic investor buys the properties, they put in new bathrooms and new kitchens and new common areas, and they drive rents to get a return on that capital, and they drive out the very consumer who's the underlying fabric, adhesive to our society. That doesn't work, so let's think of a novel idea. Let's just reduce expenses. Well, having had the luxury now of having worked in the urban markets for the last 25 years, I recognize that what we lack in affordable housing is a pride in rentership. Let's be serious. Nobody comes home after working 2 jobs a day, spends 60% of their income on rent, has their kids relegated to a public school district that's failing them and says, God, I fucking love living here. Nobody, right? It just doesn't happen. So what you have is you have a lack of pride in rentership. And what that leads to is tremendous turnover. The biggest expense of owning workforce housing is turnover. Well, what would happen if you could change the relationship between landlord and tenant? What would happen if you would enrich that community with relevant services? Well, I know for a fact the 3 most important services that these communities want is access to education. Well, isn't it funny that I also have the largest private equity fund that builds public charter schools? So I know where I'm building charter schools. I know the education business. Education is important. Safe, secure, nurturing environment, and healthcare. So what we'll do is, by way of example, I just built a K-5 public charter school in South Dallas for KIPP, Knowledge is Power program. 750 kids. Right around the corner is a 1970s built 300-unit workforce housing that was built in the 70s. It's about to go on the market. I'm going to buy it. I can pay the exact same price as anybody else. And what I'll differ is I won't improve it, I'll enrich it. And how do I enrich it? 300 units, there's typically economic vacancy in these properties of 15%. Well, let's say I just take 3% of the units. They'll always be vacant. Let's just take them offline. So I take my cost for 300 units and I say, you know something, I'm only going to amortize my cost over not 300, but 288. I'll put 12 units in my front pocket. I'll take 4%. First place I go is the school I just built. Sit down with the executive director of that school, and their biggest challenge is recruiting teachers, because you can't pay a teacher very much. Where's the teacher going to live? Well, I have 5 units that I'm setting aside. I will subsidize housing for 5 teachers. And in return for subsidized rent, here's what I do. The currency they pay me is I take some common area and I make it a tutoring lounge. And every school night of every school day of every school year, one of those 5 teachers is staffing that lounge for the benefit of our children. So you're paying too much to live in my property already, but you could never augment public education, and now you have without paying anything. Number 2, law enforcement. Everything I do for children between the hours of 9 and 5 goes out the window if they go home to an unsafe, unnurturing home environment. So how do I enrich that? Well, I walk down to the local police precinct, and I sit down with the watch commander, and I say, law enforcement agents are heroes. Here's what I have. I have 3 units for law enforcement agents and their families. Free. And in fact, if they're paying me $9,000 a year, which would have been 30% of their rent or their income, so I'm going to forego, let's say, $27,000. But I'll only subsidize it half, so maybe $15,000. So I'm foregoing $15,000. But imagine this. What happens when you have law enforcement living at a property? The number of incidences fall dramatically because there's nothing more dissuasive to a gangbanger or a prostitute or a drug dealer than a black and white car parked out front and law enforcement living there. And when you drop incidences from 99 a month to $99 a year, guess what else falls? Your insurance costs. My insurance costs for these properties are typically $300,000 to $400,000 a year. I promise you, if my incidence is dropped by 90%, my cost of insurance drops far more than $15,000 that I've forgiven in rent. But more importantly is the currency that these law enforcement officers have to pay me is, number one, if you're assigned a squad car, park it out front. Number two, you got to live in the property. You can't sublet it. Number three, you've got to make your presence known. And number four, organize and oversee a community watch program. We also do this with healthcare workers. Our families don't work 9 to 5 jobs. Our families get up at 6 in the morning. They get home at 9 o'clock at night. By that time, the traditional distributor of preventative care medicine is gone. So what do? We subsidize housing for nurse practitioners. We open up an infirmary. And every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday nights between the hours of 9 and midnight, there's healthcare provided for our families. It's not rocket science. It's just thinking outside of the box. And when you create the pride in rentership, you will quickly see that if you don't have to move, guess what? You don't move. If I can increase the duration of tenancies from 24 months to 48 months, I've just driven my profit margins by 15%. I've cut out vacancy, I've cut out bad debt, I've cut out delinquency, I've cut out turnovers, leasing commissions, and I can be as profitable as the opportunistic investor without ever-increasing rents on the very consumer whose backbone we rely upon. In the last 12 months, I've bought 3,000 units on my way to 10,000 units or $1 billion, and we've seen incredibly encouraging results. But even with innovative business models, sometimes we need help attracting or incentivizing market rate capital. And that brings us to the fifth P, policy. Can we all agree that investing in community-serving infrastructure is good for investors? And if it's good for the community as well, then I think we should all agree that there should be supportive policy, right? Well, let's talk about our city's policy and whether or not it's attracting capital or it's dissuading investment capital to need it. As a practitioner, I'm actually saddened to say that LA is truly one of the most difficult fucking cities in the country to do business in. It is. It is, absolutely is. It's difficult to get things done. In the last 4 years, my firm has invested $500 million to build 69 schools in some of the most economically challenged neighborhoods in America. 35,000 kids. I've built one in LA. And that's because of our antediluvian development policies. So what's the problem with our policies? Let's start with our comprehensive general plan. Oh, I'm sorry. We don't have one. Did I say that out loud? Let's be real. We don't have one. A great start would be for our esteemed 15-member council to get their shit together and pass a clear and thoughtful plan that encourages and supports new development and or preservation of community-serving infrastructure. We could actually steal ideas from some other great cities, like Manny Diaz from Miami, who created an as-of-right zoning and an expedited CUP process for social impact projects. Why do I have to wait 12 months to get a property zoned for a public charter school? How is that possible? 12 months. I can't wait that long. How about Texas, who has an innovative real estate tax abatement for property owners that commit to preserve affordability of housing? How about expand incentives for community-serving infrastructure to include density bonuses and large-use policy permitting? Lots of ideas we could steal. As it pertains to our growing and critical shortage of affordable housing, how about, dare I say, exploring a moratorium at the moment, or a way to discourage demolition of existing affordable stock until a comprehensive plan is passed? Things as simple as that. It's not rocket science. But if we are going to invest for today versus for tomorrow, we are absolutely in trouble as a society. Trust me. So one might ask, why is it so difficult to have policy in place for smart growth? And this brings us to our sixth and final P, the politicians, right? So when it comes to politicians, it's very clear to me that until such time as we have meaningful campaign finance reform, we're in trouble. Simply put, too many politicians subordinate the long-term best interests of the city and their constituents to re-election goals, campaign donor IOUs, and pressures from outspoken NIMBYisms. And if you don't think it happens here in LA, all you have to do is look at Huntington Park. And what happened just a few weeks ago under Mayor Ortiz and Councilwoman Marcius, they passed a moratorium on new public charter schools in Huntington Park, citing the impact on traffic and the loss of green space. Funny, they only targeted charter schools. They didn't target public schools or parochial schools or private schools. It also coincided, and it was passed one day in advance of KIPP submitting their CUP application to build a new home for their existing KIPP Comienza Elementary School. Now, if you're not familiar with KIPP Colmienza, an existing 512-student public charter school, it's the #1 performing school in California serving majority English language learners. So who in the right mind wouldn't be supportive of a new permanent school for one of the highest performing operatives in the country? Who? Well, I'll leave it up to you, but it's probably not a coincidence that both the mayor and the councilwoman's campaigns have been funded by the UTLA, United Teachers Union of Los Angeles. Okay? And while the moratorium likely violates state law, that didn't stop them from making education about adults rather than children. Let's be serious. It's this kind of self-serving behavior that leads to the political circus that we're witnessing here in America today. On a national level, I may not be a fan or supporter of Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders, but I actually understand what many of the supporters find appealing about them. They say what they believe. Now, what's concerning is what they believe. Very concerning. But what we have to recognize is that for many, this election isn't about greatness. It's not about the future or even Donald Trump. It's about defiance. It really is. For those who no longer believe in the feasibility of the American dream, a vote for Donald Trump is a way, candidly, to flip the middle finger to the system and to the politicians who continue to place their own agendas above the needs of the very people who have elected them to serve there. It's very clear to me that we can't solve today's problems with the same thinking that created them. So as my friend Andre Agassi loves to say, it's easy for most people to dream while they're asleep. But for those who have the courage to dream while they're awake, it's those who will change the world. So I'm hoping today that as you spend the rest of the afternoon listening to people, that we can conspire, that we can collaborate, and hopefully find ways to create scalable, sustainable solutions. And yes, including that should be profitable solutions to tackle some of today's most daunting challenges. Thank you very much.
Taking the stage next is our first panel, Addressing LA's Housing Needs, Increasing Market Rate, Workforce, and Affordable Housing Production in Los Angeles. Brad Cox, chairman of the LABC Institute and senior managing director at Trammell Crow Company, will moderate the panel. First, though, please welcome Michael Rosenfeld, executive manager of the Next Century Partners and CEO of Woodridge Capital Partners.
Good morning. Thank you, Bobby. That was very inspiring. Before we turn it over to our first panel of the day, we're very pleased to begin with a special presentation from Los Angeles City Council President Herb Wesson, who will help frame the first panel discussion around some of LA's key challenges and priorities that we are here to address today. It's my honor to introduce Council President Herb Wesson. Herb has served as president of the LA City Council since November of 2011 and represented the 10th District since 2005. He is the first African American to hold the position of council president in Los Angeles' history and has been reelected 3 times to lead the City Council. He chairs several committees, including the Rules, Elections, and Intergovernmental Relations and Neighborhoods Committees, Board of Referred Powers, and Ad Hoc Committee on the 2024 Summer Olympics. Herb has been an effective leader on many of the most important issues facing the city, such as pension reform, raising the minimum wage, and working together with city, state, and country leaders to put in place immediate and long-term solutions to help the city's growing number of homeless. The LABC fully supports Council President Wesson's leadership on Measure HHH, the $1.2 billion fund for the construction of much-needed supportive housing to reduce homelessness. That measure goes before the voters in the city of Los Angeles on November 8th. It's my privilege to introduce Council President Herb Wesson. Thank you.
Thank you, and good morning. And if Bobby Turner thinks it takes 12 months now, just wait till after today, boys. That son of a bitch gonna be waiting 24 years to get permit. No, that's not true. That is not true at all. Not at all. In fact, you know, it must be so cool where an individual can come and get on the stage and say the 6 P's and the S word and F. I wonder what that's going to be like in my next life, because if you get me in an environment where I don't have to watch what I say, oh, holy moly. But Mr. Turner is absolutely correct, and I truly enjoyed what he said. Let's give him a round of applause. He was a very inspirational keynote speaker, and he's right. This city needs serious leadership to address the needs of today, and that's what it's going to take, not just from people like myself, but people just like you that are sitting in this room today. We're going to have to make bold moves and bold changes. We cannot be afraid to fail. We have to do what we believe is right in our heart and our soul, and not the types of things that we believe will be right when it comes to election times. Trust me, a lot of us in this business have those very same frustrations. But it's time for us to partner together to move this city, this great city, forward. Now, before I get in my helicopter, see, I have a helicopter as the president of the city, so I'm going to fly. Now, taxpayers are, he got a helicopter. No, I do not have a helicopter, but I do have to get downtown to start our very inept city council so that we can begin our work for today. But I want to thank the Los Angeles Business Council for always incorporating me in any of the big events that you do. Personally and seriously, it means a lot to me, and I want you to know that I appreciate it. I believe in my heart and my soul that we live in the greatest city in the world. But what makes this city great are the people. And the way that you keep a city great is that you have to make adjustments and you have to change things as life goes on. And that's one of the things that the LBC, the Los Angeles Business Council, takes the lead in. Addressing issues, making recommendations. And that's what's going to happen today. You're going to sit, you're going to listen to a panel of some great folk with a lot of experience, and they're going to talk about the housing needs for the city of Los Angeles. And well, they're all great, but when one person in particular, Ann Sewell, when they call on her, I want you guys to give her one hell of a round of applause, because she had the foresight and helped us fund Proposition HHH. Give her a round of applause. It was the funding that we received from her that helped us find what we believe to be the right formula to do a couple of things. The right formula, number one, to pass on November 8th. And also it puts us in a position to take care of a large segment of people in the city of Los Angeles by giving us over $1.2 billion to build permanent supportive housing. And that's what HHH is all about. And for those of you that don't know, HHH means herb, and more herb. No, in fact, if my colleagues were here, I would say it means Herb, Harris Dawson, and Weezer. No, it is a very important, serious effort that we at the council are trying to put in place with the help of our mayor. We do believe that it's going to take serious leadership to move this city forward, and I'm going to do the very best that I can with my colleagues to try to deliver that. But I want you to pay attention to what you hear today, where it relates to the various problems, how we got there, and the solutions that it's going to take to get us out of there, because I will be listening to the very people that you listen to today, taking their suggestions and their advice to try to help move this city forward. So with that said, again, it's a pleasure to be with you today. And I want each and every one of you to have a very wonderful Wet Friday. God bless you all. Have a good summit. Thank you so much, LABC. Thank you.
Thank you, Council President Herb Wesson. We appreciate it very much. Nice to have you here. And this panel is all about big ideas, as Bobby said. We're trying to break the mold and talk about how we move housing forward in the city of Los Angeles. I'm not going to go through formal introductions in your program. You have all the background of the panelists. To my left is Doug, David, Ralph, Ann, and Tom. So let's jump right into the panel. I think Bobby did a nice job of really framing the discussion for us today in many different ways. I think Ralph truly has done some interesting reporting on data throughout the United States. You've really looked at the cities that have accelerated housing development. You've kind of benchmarked from city to city why certain cities are successful, other cities are unsuccessful. What are they doing? What the successful cities are doing differently than those that are unsuccessful. And I thought we'd start out and kind of profile a little bit of that data. So we start at the macro, and then we'll dive down and let Ann kind of profile some of the challenges we face and the demographics of the local affordable housing, the people that need housing here in the city of Los Angeles. So why don't we start off with you, Ralph? And
great. Well, thanks for being here. I do have a few slides, sort of, from a 30,000-foot perspective, show what we're dealing with both in LA and across the U.S. So this is probably not going to be news to most people in this audience, but let's look at the nature of the affordability problem. This is the price-to-income ratio in the LA metropolitan area from 1980 to this year. When my parents bought their home in California, and this applies pretty much to most major metros in the U.S., the price-to-income ratio, home prices were about 4 times the median income. Today, that's about 8. So in 35 years, it's doubled, and that's something unprecedented. That basically means my generation is paying twice as much for housing as my parents' generation was. But it's not just homeowners, boohoo, cry for homeowners. Homeowners get the value of equity, right? They actually get a return out of it if prices go up. Let's look at renters. Renters here, this is the share of median income that would have to go to the median rental unit in LA County. This has jumped from roughly an affordable 30% of income in 1980 to about 50 to 60%, depending on where you are in LA. I mean, this is incredible, and it's unprecedented, and it's worrying. Again, this is not news to probably most of you here, but it's something that we pay pretty close attention to at Trulia. So what's going on? Why is this happening? Well, housing. We need to build more housing. It's easy as an economist from 30,000-foot perspective to say this, right? I have the easy job. The hard job is how to make that happen. But let's look at this issue here. Does building more housing in the long run lead to price moderation? In the short run, there's discussion and some arguments that say no, it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. We build a lot of housing in 2 or 3 years, and we don't see prices go down. Well, we don't know the counterfactual, which is how much prices would have gone up had we not built housing. This is the list of the 10 metros in the U.S. that have built the most housing relative to demand. You look at Las Vegas, Raleigh, Albuquerque, Charlotte. These places have increased their housing stock between about 40 and 90% over the last 30 years. Prices have gone up. These are unadjusted numbers. About 80 to 70%, which isn't bad for that time period. It means their elasticity, which is a very wonky economic term for how much housing you build relative to demand, is pretty high. As demand goes up, new housing is supplied. Prices, don't skyrocket. Let's look at the 10 metros, and particularly where they are in the U.S. that have low elasticity, that have not built a lot of housing relative to demand. And you're thinking, well, this is kind of weird. New Orleans and Pittsburgh come to the top of that list. What's going on? Well, New Orleans and Pittsburgh both had a lot of vacant housing at the start of this time period. If you take those metros out, look at the list. LA tops it. Shortly behind LA is San Francisco, and then a few other California markets make the list, San Jose. And this is problematic. I mean, LA over the last 30 years has increased, this is LA Metro again, not the city. The metropolitan area has increased its housing stock by about 8.5%. Prices have increased 210%. So, we can't, definitively say, from a correlation perspective that building new housing, helps moderate prices, but the evidence is pretty compelling that it does play a role. And the last point I just want to make here is, what are some examples of cities, maybe that are doing fairly well? This is the city of Los Angeles. This is the 100,000 unit goal that we talked about this morning. Doesn't look too bad. We're 2 years in. The city is built. About a little under 40,000, about 35,000 units. Most of it multifamily. So good job. Let's pat ourselves on the back. But let's be a little humble about this and compare it to other metros in the U.S. Orange is Houston, green is L.A., and blue is Seattle. Houston is well over 40,000 units. L.A. is between 30 and 35, and Seattle is about 25,000 units. And why does this matter? Well, if you look at Seattle, about 25,000 units, the population of the city of Seattle, this is cities, population of the city of Seattle is 600,000. The population of Los Angeles is almost 4 million. Let's use Houston as a better example of a peer. Houston's got about 3 million people, and they built, close to 50,000 units, 45,000 units. So this is the nature of the problem that we're dealing with.
What's the characteristics of the successful cities? Why are they building more housing than us? We can talk all day about the processing and the difficulties of moving through our permit and entitlement process here, but what are the other successful elements that?
This is probably the most interesting thing that I got out of studying it. Houston and Seattle are great examples because they sort of live in politically polar opposite worlds. Houston is very much a low regulatory environment. They don't have zoning. They streamline subdivision and build a lot of housing. Seattle actually is a lot more like California cities. There's a lot more regulations in Seattle. They have similar topography, surrounded by water, similar constraints. What's similar about the two is they both help the market. They both help the market provide new housing. Houston actually has a program called the Land Assembly Redevelopment Authority, LARA, which actually will assemble units, which developers, correct me if I'm wrong, is probably one of the most difficult things if you're going to redevelop an area, is assembling the parcels. They will buy up foreclosed properties or combine them with public property and sell them at cut rate for affordable housing. Seattle, though they do, Seattle looks more like California cities, especially LA and San Francisco. Seattle also greases the wheels in a lot of other respects. They have a streamlined design review process. They do have an affordable housing requirement, but they have lots of property tax concessions, for those developments. In addition, they also have zoned a lot of land already to allow for new development. So that's, those are a couple of examples of two very polar opposite metros and very different political environments that do well at providing housing.
Good. Those are good points. And I think a little bit later in the panel, we're going to Tom will profile a little bit of their successes and challenges both in Portland, Seattle, and Los Angeles, because they're developing in all three of those markets. But staying on the macro end, if you could jump in and kind of give us a profile of, who are the renters out there? Who are the people that really are challenged to afford housing in the city of Los Angeles? I think you've got some interesting slides. And first, again, one big round of applause for Ann. We recognized her for it's a phenomenal commitment. They've committed over $16 million with the Conrad Hilton Foundation, the Weingart Foundation, that will create at least 1,000 units of permanent housing, which is over more than 700 per year over the current housing stock that we're developing for the permanent housing market. So again, thank you for your efforts on that. So with that, please.
Well, thank you. And actually, with the addition of the Kresge Foundation, we're now almost to 25 million in that. And what that money is to do, and I'll tell this story before I jump into this. A year ago yesterday, 6 developers, 4 foundations, Rushmore Cervantes from HSID, somebody from the county, some lenders, CSH got together and said, 300 units? That's kind of a pathetic number in a city that has 25,000 unsheltered homeless people. What would it take to get to 1,000? And the county said, I'm in for services, and Rushmore said, I'm in for helping however I can. And we realized that it would take about $60 million that could be recycled, and that's where the foundation money comes in, to basically call the question. Let's get our developer partners to just start those units and assume in faith that HHH or No Place Like Home or the county's, what we affectionately call the boomerang money and they call general fund, would be available, when those units are ready for that permanent subsidy. And Councilmember Wesson, everybody just totally got on board, and it's been really an amazing experience with the county and the city cooperating and everybody coming together. I've been doing what I do for 30 years. I mean, looking at your numbers, in 1977 when I moved to Los Angeles, there was a homeless person on the corner of Wilshire and Bundy, and I stopped and stared. I mean, you never saw, this was unthinkable that you would step over a person lying on the street. It's just, we did not know homelessness as we know it now. And in that time, because our homeless problem is largely a mental health problem and a housing problem, we've seen this come about. But we've often seen people sort of sniping at the service providers want more shelters and the housing providers want more housing. This, with a lot of leadership from groups like Inner City Law Center, with their group of 57 entities that got together and said, we can all do this together, has led to this focus. So if you happen to be voting on November 8th, you know what to do. So anyway, so we were really grateful to be able to do
Great. Well,
that.
it's nice to see that collaborative effort. It's the first time we really had
Yeah.
both county, city, and everyone rolling up their sleeves to figure collaboratively how to solve the problem.
Yes, exactly. And people, do wring their hands and say, oh my God, where will we put these units? But when we had redevelopment, we were doing 1,000 units a year, not of permanent supportive housing, but it's not. We have a whole industry that knows how to do this. We can definitely pull this off. So I wanted. Do you want me to jump?
Yeah, please
okay.
jump in.
So this slide is a little deceptive in the moderate income housing, and I will explain why in a second. But doing this work for the last year and however many years focused on homelessness has really made our partners and the Community Foundation think about the fact that housing for homeless people who are experiencing street homelessness is really, we think about it as 46,000 people that we counted in the homeless count in this last year. It's probably really 150,000 people who cycle in and out of homelessness in any given year. And that's really a symptom of extreme housing insecurity, people who are paying 60% of their income or more for housing. In March, the county did a poll of 1,200 likely voters across the county. And one of the questions was, do you fear that you or your family will become homeless in the next year? 52% of all renters in the county said yes. But most shocking is 30% of people who earned $60,000 to $90,000 a year said yes, which tells us that even moderate income people are living paycheck to paycheck and experiencing that housing insecurity. So Mr. Turner's description of the family in East LA that is paying 60% of their income for rent, that's all over the city, that's all over the county. So we have, our homeless crisis is largely our housing crisis, and we need to think that this great example this last year of all of us working together to go from 300 to 1,000 units, how do we set those goals in each one of the categories of need for people who are extremely low income, people who are working, low-income people, and then on into moderate-income families. Right now, we just sort of do the best we can, but we don't have a specific goal that we're driving to. So that's what I was trying to get to with this slide is, if we were to set a goal and that was a stretch and we said, let's find the money to do it, and we all work together towards that, what would that look like? And I don't know of any group more attuned to work with the housing advocates on that than LABC. So that would be a fun project for the next year. So one of the challenges you can see from this is the need number is really derived from people in that income category who are currently paying more than 50% of their income for rent. There's actually a much greater number if you ask the Southern California Association of Governments in terms of new jobs driving new households. This just looks at a snapshot of, as of the last count, how many people were paying more than 50% of their income for rent in the census. So this number is actually somewhat conservative. And the category in the middle of extremely low income, low and moderate income, we typically address those with what we call affordable housing using the low income housing tax credit, and we serve people across that income range. For moderate income families, even though there's about, I had somebody check last night, there's about, DataQuick says we sold 1,500 homes in the last month that are affordable to that group of families across the city. So, in all the different zip codes across the city. But there's, if we were to try to address those needs in using rental housing for folks that don't have the credit, don't have the down payment, can't get into the for sale market, because there aren't any tax benefits the way we have the low income housing tax credit program, we would have to find other sources, and that's why that price tag is so large. So it's a little deceptive there because we do have, it doesn't assume, mortgage interest deduction or anything like that. We do have other things that we could bring to it. So this is really, I wanted to make this cuter with little houses, but this is really looking at how do we really come up with a shared goal, just as we have with homelessness, and move towards that.
It's a great slide, and I want to dive in. And Tom, Holland Partners works in all the West Coast markets, and Tom and I are developers, so we always talk about housing supply. Building more housing of all categories is the solution here, and we have the challenges in Los Angeles. You've worked here in LA, and we all know the difficulty of getting approvals and processing new housing in the city of Los Angeles. Talk a little bit about Seattle, Portland, and some of the innovative strategies that they have tried up in those markets, how they've worked, how they've not worked, and how we can take some of those lessons learned and apply them on what we're trying to accomplish here in Los Angeles.
Sure. As has been mentioned several times in this forum already, the solution to housing affordability is supply. I mean, we are not building enough housing. The cities that build more housing have more affordable housing. Cities that build less, it's just obvious. But the challenges to that are difficult, as Herb Wesson mentioned. We're in a city with a suburban zoning. LA was developed largely during the reign of the automobile. Everybody thought it was the greatest thing, kind of a failed experiment over the last 50 years, that maybe that isn't the solution to all our problems, but it's kind of still existing in our zoning. And the other cities, I mean, the solution is figuring out ways to encourage supply. It's very complicated in LA. The process, getting all the departments to work together. I mean, despite the city's best efforts, we've got this ingrained infrastructure that's preventing housing development, and we have to figure out a way to turn that around. We're talking about, one of your questions was downtown LA. Why has Holland done so much in downtown? And we looked across the region. Where is the demand? Where is there transportation infrastructure that supports the demand? There's 500,000 housing units downtown. There was a shortage of actual, 500,000 employees downtown, only 25,000 people living downtown. I mean, it was the biggest disparity on the West Coast. We identified that originally when we came to Southern California from Seattle and said this is an issue. As the interest in urban living turns around, that's going to change. So that was sort of our impetus to get into downtown LA, but as we continued to look for places to develop in Southern California, as we got more familiar with the market, realized that one of a big reason to build in downtown LA is it's easier to get your permits. You're building in an area that's zoned for use by right. You're building in an area that embraces density. There isn't a lot of neighborhood opposition, and that's unique in most of LA. So it's getting a lot of supply. And
it's unique in all of LA.
In all of LA. Well, there are pockets where they really want housing. Right. They're not necessarily aligned with where the jobs are. Right. Downtown happens to be aligned with where the jobs are, where the transportation is. It just makes sense to develop downtown. Right. So that's sort of some of our context. When you look at the major West Coast cities, Seattle, Portland, the Bay Area, and I've built in all these, I've worked with the permitting agencies and all these, and they have very different character. I mean, Seattle, I mean, they've got a set of rules. It's, fairly complicated set of rules, but it's very transparent and consistent. I mean, one of the things that everybody in business will talk about is predictability drives investment. When you know what the playing field is, you're willing to put your money in, and you figure out the rules and you work with it. So Seattle does a very good job of laying the ground rules and making it clear and following them in an efficient manner. So Portland's very different. They like to dictate what people do. There's some more just the Portland Development Commission gets to say what happens in Portland. Fortunately, they have a pretty good perspective, and they have some thoughtful policies, but it's much more prescriptive. Here's what you're going to do in our city, but they help you get it done. The Southern California, we have this just crazy complicated city with 12 different departments. Everybody has entrenched interests. The politicians come and go. The heads of departments are there for 30 years, and it's hard to get them to work together. So not for lack of trying, it's just really hard to work through the process. The political system it's important to work with your local councilmen. They have to be on board for what happens in their district. So you have to work closely with the political system, but it's highly regulated, so it's transparent and thoughtfully put together. There's not a lot of corruption. The Bay Area, San Francisco is very different, and it's more like an East Coast city where you have to pay to play in the city itself, which is creating its problems that you see
Unto
with
itself, yeah.
Anyway, kind of following on that, what are the cities doing with this affordability crisis? Because everybody's feeling it. There's pressure because of the cause for social justice. We need to fix this, or it'll be taken out of our hands by the voters. The Bay Area, there's rent control is on the ballot. You're seeing people rise up and demand that we do something now about this lack of affordability. And it's all driven by the economy being so robust and just an inability to deliver housing where the jobs are. Rent control isn't a great solution. It's nice to say, look, we're going to stop this, but it drives away investment, and it limits maintenance and causes all kind of problems. Thinking about kind of the economics of this, it's all about supply again, and the more pressure you put on costs, the longer it takes for deals to become, the further rents have to move before a deal will become financially feasible. We did a study talking about inclusionary zoning, and if you impose a 15% affordable requirement where those 15% of the units have to be affordable at 80% of median income, if you impose that on a development, assuming you're solving for a given return on investment, which is, our investors need to get a certain return before they're willing to fund the project. If they don't fund the project, it doesn't happen. Given a fixed return on investment, if you reduce the income by that 15% affordable requirement, the market rate rents have to move by 10% to get to the same level of return. So what you're really doing is slowing down the delivery of housing until such time as market rate rents rise by 10%. It doesn't happen so efficiently, it's over time, but in the long term, that's the dynamic that happens with inclusionary zoning. The same thing with certain cost increases. What we need to do is figure out a way to streamline the zoning process by delivering zoning by right, and it's the biggest challenge in LA because while people may understand this, you have to overcome all the NIMBYism and all the objections, because we have in California a very robust set of tools to oppose development. With CEQA, while it protects us against, once you follow the process, it's a nice protection against all the challenges, but it takes a long time and it really adds to the process. So
it's tough, you got to break the mold.
Right. So we have some ideas on that if we come back to it. But what Seattle has done a good job. They do have tax abatement for 12 years if you agree to affordable requirements of, I think it's 65, 75, and 85% depending on where in the city you're developing. But you can get a 12-year tax abatement when you add affordable housing. And that doesn't quite offset the impacts of affordable housing, but it gets close. And so the other thing Seattle's doing is they're adding incentives. And when you can provide incentives for developers to deliver affordable housing, it happens without such a burden on the deal. In Seattle, they're adding floors, height to their projects, saying, well, if you get an extra floor, if you do 6, 7, 8% affordability depending on the area. They're having discussions at a top level. It's a smaller city, a little more manageable. You can sit down with representatives of the development community and the mayor and kind of hash out a plan. And that's what they've done in what their grand bargain that is currently going on. And there's always backlash. The public thinks the city's not asking for enough. The development community thinks they're asking for too much. You've got to go back and forth. But Seattle's having that dialogue actively and implementing it. And that's something that they've done successfully. Plus, they have all the zoning by right. They've realized density is a good thing. If you have all your jobs downtown, Amazon, Google coming, Facebook, I mean, everybody's coming there. Build housing where the jobs are, because that's the only way to avoid this terrible traffic gridlock that they're experiencing.
Yeah,
I mean,
we have to densify around transportation.
yeah, so let's put housing where it's most palatable. Let's put housing where the infrastructure is. Let's put housing where the jobs are. Here we have challenges west side, downtown LA. Again, downtown LA, we're going there in large part because the transportation infrastructure is already there. The freeways all go there. It's this focal point of our metro rail. So it's logical, but what we have proposals to figure out how can we put more housing where it's not so opposed and where you already have the infrastructure to take care of it.
Pockets of infrastructure.
So with that additional density, you can afford to pay for affordable housing, and that's the
You
give.
can
It's not-
integrate it into the market rate developments.
It always feels like such a bartering chip, but it shouldn't be a negotiating tool. I mean, let's get more density. That solves the problem, and by getting more density, you have more money to pay for the affordable housing. So that's kind of the basis. Portland, they're struggling with their own things, but I've probably taken enough time. So
No, it's good. Those are all great points. The Trammell Crow Company, we have 3 developments as a result of public-private partnerships where we're doing 80-20 deals, 20% affordable and 80% market rate. I think David and Doug, who both have 2 very successful and challenging public-private partnerships that they've worked on, Jordan Downs and then the Sage Park Apartments, I think they're good case studies to just kind of talk about from a dialogue standpoint as to how it worked and what were the goals and objectives and the solutions that you came up with in order to move Jordan Downs forward. Congratulations, that's a huge move. And then I want to talk about Sage Park because that was an LAUSD focused effort to try to deliver affordable housing on LAUSD properties for teachers, similar to what Bobby outlined, as he's been very successful in doing in Dallas. So, Doug, you want to talk a little bit first on Jordan Downs, and then we'll have David talk about Sage Park.
Sure. Well, I was joking with Mary Leslie before we started here. I think this is probably the 15th year that Jordan Downs has been on as part of the panel discussion here. But it's been a very long road to get to this point. Jordan Downs is an existing development, 700 public housing units in the Watts community in South Los Angeles. And there have been multiple attempts over the years. We acquired a 21-acre industrial site, which required a significant environmental remediation. We had to put together a significant amount of resources to move it forward, as well as a community engagement process that has to take place and all the kind of stacking of financing and getting everything aligned. But I am happy to report we've made a great amount of progress on that. Where our schedule is right now, we're prepared to break ground on the first residential units in January. And we've been able to do that through all this work, but one of the principal resources of funding that's come our way is cap and trade funds. So for that initial phase of 115 units, we were awarded $6 million in cap and trade funds, and then the most recent round, we received a $12 million award of cap and trade funds from the state to fill the significant financial gap for the next 135 units. So by springtime, we should have 250 units under construction. We're taking bids now to build out the infrastructure improvements for Century Boulevard, and we should have 120,000 square feet of retail development underway by the spring as well. So after all this, we're really looking forward to seeing the actual physical housing coming up out of the ground.
That's exciting, though. It's been a long haul for you, I know.
It's I've been pushing a pretty big boulder up that big hill for a long time, but I think we're at the point again of I think we'll have substantial support for this. We'll be able to figure out future phases once we start seeing this breaking ground. I know there's been support by the city, by the mayor's office, the council office, all the city departments. It takes a lot of people working together to make something like this happen, and I'll be interested in coming back to this forum a year from now, and we'll have pictures and slides to show of all the construction work that's
And what is the
underway.
blending of housing affordability in there? Is it Section 8? Is it spread? Is there market rate units that are included in there?
Well, the overall plan is for development of a mixed income community of 1,400 housing units. It will include 700 units that will be replacement housing for the existing public housing that's there. That will be done in a variety of forms, but it will be an equivalent sort of affordability so that the existing residents that are there now will be able to return to those units. The balance of the 700 units are a combination of higher levels of affordability as well as market rate rental housing and some market rate for sale housing.
Great. And that kind of parallels into what David and the Sage Park Apartments development. The intent there was to develop on LAUSD surplus properties, affordable housing for teachers.
Yeah.
And talk a little bit about some of what you discovered with Bridge as you move forward and financed and both designed and developed that project.
Sure, happy to. Some of you have probably seen this project and the other LAUSD project in the LA Times recently, whereas actually the teachers make too much money to actually live in the teacher housing. So these are those projects, if you actually read about them, and I think some articles have deemed them as being less successful than they are. They've actually been very successful. LAUSD also employs all the security people, all of the custodial, administrative. There's a lot of other people that work for LAUSD. And so both projects have been oversubscribed and fully, at least the Sage Park project, our project, has been fully occupied. It's focused on 30% to 60% AMI, and so that's the range that it's in, and the teachers need to be more in an 80 to 120% AMI to be able to incorporate them. We were entitled quickly. The working with LAUSD worked very smoothly. This was surplus land. There weren't a lot of neighbors. Our main neighbor was Gardena High School, and then power lines and other, other things in the area. But then we had to wait for our TCAC funding. And, to sit there with an entitled project in 2010, when construction prices were at an ideal point, and wait another 2.5 years for the TCAC funding, and then to be, now we're starting design in 2012, and we're actually building in late 2012 and into 2013. Those of you who are in this business know that we were starting to see increases there. And so I think that was one of the real challenges. And because of the amount of funding that was available, we went from 120 units down to 90 units. And we could definitely support the 120 unit density. And Bridge would have loved to have figured out a way to build the other 30 or so units and get those to be an 80 to 120. And just basically a more blended development so that it could serve, a wider range of people. And we'll just make a plug for the workforce affordable housing is so important. We can build it so much more quickly than we can build a rail system or a bus system. Those take years and years and years to build, and we can build these relatively quickly, and we can make an impact right away. So this is a summit about affordable housing and transit, and it's really about those two things working together. And we can build the housing first and let the transit catch up to it. And that's what we're seeing on our market rate deals. We're building a series of high-rises along the Wilshire Corridor. One sits right in K-Town, so the transit is there. But the other three, one in Westwood and the other two in Mid-Wilshire, they're looking at the Purple Line. And the Purple Line is a key component, that extension, to them seeing those as a long-term rental play that makes a lot of sense for those developers, two that are local and two that are national. So I agree with Tom. We need to get the overall quantity of housing in LA. We've got to focus on that. And then the other component is that we've got to really look at these opportunities where there's surplus land. And I'll just say one more thing, Brad. There's DWP land, there's LAUSD land, there's LACCD land, there's County of LA land, and there's City of LA land. And one of the reasons Houston worked, and it's very different than Seattle, is Houston had a lot of land to be able to tackle. They got the transit in, which helped. But I think that's one of the things. We really have to look at our land resources and figure out where we can make these P3, public-private ventures, work to be able to get 90, 120 units in different pockets around the city?
Well, we have two big initiatives that are obviously on the ballot with HHH and Measure M, transportation, $1.2 billion for housing. We have the challenges that everyone just raised here. There's lots of land. The opportunity is there's lots of land. Ron Galpern put out a report this morning. There's 9,000 City of LA surplus properties that are available. So we have lots of land, the need for housing. We need more houses. Voters are going to vote on November 8th for two very, very large bond, and there's a lot of money coming out here. So how do we deliver housing? How are we going to implement HHH and do that in a period that the voters have the confidence that they're going to see housing, they're going to see solutions to the problems? And I ask that for all of you on the panel. I'd like to hear your opinions. I think everyone would like to.
Oh, go ahead, Ann. You can go first, and I'll jump in.
Yep.
Thanks, Doug. The great public-private partnership there. So let's see. Thinking about so what adds to the cost and difficulty of doing housing? It's non-predictability. It's waiting around for your financing. It's taking we figured out that it takes 2.5 years usually to entitle a permanent supportive housing project in the city of LA. Actually, in the smaller cities like El Monte, you can do it in 6 months. So how do we move the city of LA from 2.5 years to 6 months, which saves a whole lot of money? And actually, the mayor and the staff have been working on that. When you turn in your affordable housing project now to planning, they'll say, "Oh, this is a pink jacket project," and they start moving it along the accelerated, review process. So that's great. I think the plans for the HHH units are trying to get rid of that unpredictability. It's assuming, for instance, all 4% tax credits. So you just have a monthly funding cycle. You don't have to wait for your twice a year. It's assuming that there's a whole cadre. There's already, I know the foundations that are working together have funded 9 permanent supportive housing nonprofits, and there's at least another 6 or 7 mission-aligned for-profit developers that have gotten good at doing this. So there's an industry of people to do it. There's, as you said, there's land. The CAO's office put out an announcement for a bunch of sites, and we had a meeting of all the developers the other day and went around the room and asked people what they were working on in terms of the units to use HHH money. And there were 15 projects in the room that are just, that have been identified, that are ready if this gets passed to get going.
And how many units would that be?
So,
15?
15 projects times 70. I'm not good at math,
Okay.
but however many that is.
1,000?
Yeah, roughly.
50. Yep.
Roughly. And I think, as probably a lot of people know, HHH, while primarily targeted to serving chronically homeless and people at risk of chronic homelessness, it's 20% of it is also available for just family or non-homeless but affordable housing.
If I could then jump in and talk about this a bit. First of all, the Housing Authority is the largest provider of affordable housing here in the city of Los Angeles. We have 85,000 units that we're responsible for, both 10,000 units that we own and manage, another 75,000 units involved in our Section 8 program. And almost all of our housing is deeply affordable as well. 17,000 of those units are already set aside and targeted to the homeless population here in the city of Los Angeles for permanent supportive housing. HHH is really going to be providing the principal capital that will allow for an expansion of new development of housing for the homeless population, permanent supportive housing, which I think everyone agrees is the better of all the solutions. We've been providing the Section 8 support behind that, which is fundamentally necessary. So you have all the pre-development identification of land. You've got the deep subsidies that HHH will provide. You have the operating support that we'll provide through the Housing Authority commitment to Section 8. Then you have to have the wraparound services to go with it that would come from the county. So the Housing Authority, if HHH is going to go through, we're prepared to commit 5,000 units of long-term Section 8 to underwrite the support over the next 5 years for those development goals of 1,000 units a year. We're very hopeful that HHH goes forward. We'll be working with our partners. Rushmore is here representing HSID, and with the county to more than triple the services and the build-out of permanent supportive housing.
Yeah. Tom?
So, trying to figure out how to deliver more, how to get more supply. In LA, we don't seem to be able to align our goals and kind of, there's a lot of solutions that are possible, but it has to be coordinated, like we were talking about earlier. We have this bond financing mechanism. The challenge is to the timing on your deal. You're waiting for competitive rounds of tax credits. You don't get that round, you don't get the next one, and you miss this low-cost construction environment. Well, with bond financing, it's currently non-competitive. There's a bond allocation out there in California that hasn't been spent because interest rates have been so low, and there's reasons for it. But there is a big bond allocation out there. However, the city of LA requires prevailing wages be used for any bond financing project, even though it's not triggered otherwise in the state of California. So here we were trying to build affordable housing with bond financing, and we're imposing a increased cost on that really is demotivating for going ahead with the bond financing on wood frame projects in LA. Now, high-rise, it's not as big an impact. That's an appropriate place, but that just is driving costs. The high-rise units are $500,000 a door. So, is that the right place to be spending this money? And it's working with these different regulations and figuring out what makes sense. He was talking about, we're looking out for adults' security, not watching out for the kids. That's what's going on here. Now, we work with union labor all the time on our high-rise projects, and that makes sense. And in fact, in San Diego, we're doing a bond finance project with prevailing wages on a high-rise in the city core. And one of the reasons we're able to do that is the city has put a specific plan in place. They've got an EIR in place for the entire downtown area that streamlines the process. So we were able to buy an unentitled site and entitle it within 4 months and start construction later that summer. Because it's already kind of anticipated. They've run the traps. They've done a lot of things on a global scale that developers would have to do individually. LA needs to do more of that. And if we could align those interests, it makes a big difference. I mean, this bond financing tool is a really good one because you can afford, because of the low cost, higher leveraged debt, you can afford to pay for the construction costs of these affordable units because you're delivering 80% of them as market, and the market subsidizes the affordable. It's not a penalty to the developers, but it is providing more housing using the existing mechanisms. We've got to coordinate these efforts.
Yeah. Ralph, and what have you seen in a couple of the other markets?
As far as
just on how they're dealing with these bond initiatives where they're financing homeless housing through bonds, initiating public financing, accelerating the development.
Yeah, I mean, most of the trends, at least in cities in the West Coast and throughout the country, are affordable housing, inclusionary housing requirements, and bonds. Those are the two main tools. And I sort of forgive me, my sort of economist and personal perspective on this. I think moving towards bonds is a step in the right direction. And moving away from inclusionary housing is actually a step in the right direction. Controversial, but let me explain myself. I think affordable housing, below market rate housing, should be looked at as a public good. That everyone benefits if most working class citizens can have a place to live in that doesn't eat up 50% of their budget. And if we accept that assertion to be true, we should treat affordable housing more like we treat roads and parks and other sorts of public goods. If we have a shortage of, say, milk, or milk becomes expensive, we don't make the providers of milk to provide affordable milk. We subsidize the production, we subsidize the producers of that good. And so the more I think that we can move towards bonds from everyone contributing, or perhaps even more provocative is let's look at who benefits from rising unaffordability. And that typically is existing homeowners who've owned their homes for many, many years. They experience increases in prices. So perhaps a transfer tax on those that have seen a certain amount of appreciation on the seller side to contribute to affordable housing funds is a step, at least in my opinion, in the right direction. It's not to say that inclusionary housing isn't always doesn't always knock back projects because it can be capitalized into the land value. right, but that doesn't work as well in places that have lots of mixed-use zoning, where, say, non-residential uses can outbid that land, and then the project never happens.
Yeah, no, we have to create incentives. The LA solution is tax. It's like coming out with a linkage fee and saying that we're going to, now take it up to, now our fees are going to go from being 55% higher than any other major city to 65% higher than any other major city in the United States.
Except, Brad, that's not true. At
Yeah,
the
I
risk
wanted to
of
challenge
sounding
you on
like
that.
I'm woman-splaining on this panel, I mean, between two perfectly lovely gentlemen who I think are just wrong. I mean, we don't have the highest fees. I mean, there are charts. Ben Winter, somewhere in this audience, has charts. We've looked. The mayor's team has looked at our the fees that we charge relative to other cities. I think, we talk about predictability. We're going to have prevailing wages in the city of LA. That's just, that's a hint. Predictable acceptance is the first step. So I think we have to understand that and just kind of move along. We're going to, in a state that is increasingly 60% renters, we're probably going to deal with rent stabilization as a first, a defense. And yet the real challenge, I think, that and I don't know that it's an individual developer's job to do it, but I think as an organization like the Business Council or as foundations or as government, we have a sort of, Trump-Hillary thing going on here between community residents that fear displacement, that are seeing rents go up by $1,000 a month in Culver City or other cities that just, every time a new development comes into their community, they don't see it as a possible plus. I have a friend who just moved from working with a group called LA Can to being an executive director of a nonprofit housing group. She said, now every low-income person that my staff meets has just had their biggest housing problem solved because there are tenants. In my old job, that was a unicorn. Nobody ever lived in an affordable unit. And we have to bridge that divide, because our residents are going to keep passing anti-growth things if they don't see what we do as a solution to housing.
Just to add to that, Ann, and there are a lot of different ways of raising the capital for the city, but Los Angeles is one of the few cities in the country that doesn't have a permanent source of financing for affordable housing. And to throw one other kind of big number out there, I mean, we have a Section 8 waiting list. It hasn't been opened in 15 years. We're preparing to open that waiting list up here shortly. We estimate there are as many as 800,000 households in Los Angeles that qualify for assisted housing. The demand is overwhelming for all ranges of affordability. The city has to do more than what it's been able to do, whether it be a linkage fee or some other sort of resource to help address that.
No, and I want to, because David and I have this discussion, I'm going to let you lead into it and answer it. But I hear what you're saying, but the challenge we also face in this city is that we need densification around our major transportation centers.
Right. Yeah.
And we have that opposition out there of the NIMBYs and the people that don't want no change. And if you have no change, housing prices are just going to continue to accelerate. And David, that's kind of why we've spent a lot of time focusing on these urban transit centers for densifying and building tall buildings.
Yeah, and I think the densification, I agree that we have to bring the NIMBYs along. That's a tough thing because everybody's got a different viewpoint here. But one of the things along those transit centers is we got to reduce the parking requirement.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
one of the things that makes these deals tough to pencil in LA is the parking requirement. And if we look at other cities and what makes other cities attractive, I mean, you can build residential in downtown San Francisco and not provide a car. And so that ability to look at downtown, because downtown is an area where we have a lot of transit coming into it, as areas to reduce significant, not just for existing buildings, not the ordinances that are already in place, but for new construction. We need to be able to reduce the parking requirements. And those will help these deals be more attractive and make them, give them a chance to pencil.
I mean, it's broken, and you look at, we're developing La Plaza Village, which is a block from Union Station. 25% of the cost of our project is building parking that 10 years from now will not be used for cars. It's just, people are not going to be driving.
To have an added burden to the development, to the developers, to you and Tom, and not have any concession about reducing the parking or making some other adjustment, I mean, it needs to be thought of more comprehensively. You know, if we also look at cities that do specific plans, and you know, it was said earlier, but I'll tell you, those are the kinds of things that are going to work out and attract and solve neighborhood problems. We've got to get on track with doing specific plans in this city, or we're going to just keep having this panel year after year after year, and we're going to just keep chasing these problems year after year.
Yeah,
Tom, go ahead.
I mean, this is a great example of the challenge in coming together and figuring out policy solutions to this issue that's affecting all of us. I mean, I've obviously even the wrong impression about the prevailing wages. My only point is let's figure out how to enact policies that make it possible to deliver housing at the lowest possible cost, because that ultimately encourages production. And there are places where the prevailing wages make all kinds of sense. And in our high-rise deals, it's a small premium over what we would be spending anyway on, you know, what is largely union labor building these buildings. It's just when you apply that to a wood frame structure, it takes the costs up by 25 to 30%. And so is that what we want to be doing while we're trying to encourage the production of more affordable housing, is build more costs in? Should that affordable housing be put into high-rise buildings at $600,000 a unit, or can we find a way to put it into existing projects at $250,000 to $300,000 a unit? Funding that cost is much easier than funding the large cost. So it's really, I want to reach out and try to figure out how to do that and enact policy that would work. One of the ideas that Clyde has had, and we've been talking about with several policymakers, is this idea of increasing density. Because if you take a site that's zoned for 100 units an acre and allow it to be built, and it has to be in the right spot, or you're going to be overwhelmed with neighborhood opposition and never get the project approved, they're never get the zoning in place. But in certain areas, the zoning is more restrictive than the neighborhood would insist on. And if you can take that density from 100 to 600, you build 6 times the amount of housing on that site. You're generating 6 times the amount of impact fees, whatever Quimby fees, school fees, park fees, and linkage fees, they go in there, you're going to have 6 times as much on that site. And so suddenly, in areas where it makes sense, you're delivering more housing, you're getting more funding sources, and what I didn't mention there is the increased tax rate, because now the property is not worth $100 million, it's worth, I don't know the math, $400 million, but you're getting 4 times the amount of taxes than you would have had on that lower zoning. And that money, if organized, we have to go to the state. I mean, the city can't do this on their own. But if you could reallocate the way that money's spent, you could take some of that increased tax increment and fund housing. You fund affordable housing. Set it aside. It goes to schools. It goes to police and fire. Some of it goes to housing, but let's make sure enough of it goes to housing to really provide a funding source for these units. And to take that further, a creative idea is, rather than using it to build new housing at the cost of today's replacement costs, what if you could pay existing property owners to rent restrict their buildings? So you're not taking anything away, you're buying a rent restricted unit, but you're buying it in units that cost $200,000 to $300,000 rather than building at $600,000 a door to deliver these units. That money could go a whole lot further. Yeah. But think of all the hurdles to getting this done. We have to figure out how to break those down and work together to deliver more housing.
Yeah, it's one of the ideas Doug and I have talked about is that Section 8 vouchers, figuring out how we can layer some of that capital into market rate housing in order to help drive the lower end of Section 8 housing into a market rate unit, but having some source of financing there that's going to help fill the capital stack. So.
Right. No, I think our Section 8 is a valuable resource. We have more flexibility now to provide long-term contracts utilizing Section 8. We need to figure out how to leverage that along with market rate housing to get more housing in general, not just deeply affordable housing, but the city needs housing. Affordability is just an important component of that.
So Ann and Doug in particular, you work a lot at the county and state levels, and one of the challenges we always face is collaboration between all of our government entities. CEQA is obviously state. We have the county who provides the services, and we have the city who really drives and deals with local land use. So how do we collectively get those people to work together? And appreciate any comments from anybody on the panel on it. But we've been historically, everybody operates in a silo. We need to be marching down the same path collectively to solve this problem.
Well, I would like to suggest on the whole issue of homelessness that the city and county have been collaborating for the past 2 to 3 years. In particular, we work very closely with the county officials. We work closely with LAHSA, with the city. The county has come up with some very creative programs. It's housing for health programs, which is using housing dollars and county general funds for housing the homeless population has been very innovative, and it runs in parallel with the efforts that we have underway. So we've got a very good collaboration. We just need to expand on it significantly. So we know how to do this, and we know the partners that we need. We can make it work.
I think many of us watched the governor's effort to do a CEQA streamlining, what was sort of known as the by right proposal this year, and that was a bruising experience for many people. But it sort of gets to what I realized listening to a lot of the groups that we fund to do resident organizing is that they like CEQA because it gives them a chance to batter one project at a time to try to get community benefits. But of course, while they are battering that one project, 4 others slip by thinking, thank God, focus over there, I'm going to go over here and get my permits. And so really it's a need to translate that whole, we need specific plans, as you said, to really get residents understand that the planning process can protect them and can get the certainty that developers want and the certainty that neighbors want, and that's a huge trust building thing. People have to understand what they will get if they give over control, and you can't do that in 4 months. It's going to take a little bit of work on that. So I think we need to all dedicate ourselves to trying to bring the city and the state together on that, and the county has been involved a little bit in that, but not much.
So with that, I've got the notice that we need to wrap up the panel. Will you please give this great panel a round of applause? And as evidenced by the discussion, we have a lot of work ahead in order to meet Mr. Turner and Mr. Wesson's goals. So thank you all. It's a break now, I think, and then we'll be back here in about 15 minutes.
That's great.
Back in 15 minutes. Thank you.